A small band of humans huddles on a barren shoreline. Behind them, drought has turned their homeland to dust. Ahead, an ocean they cannot cross. They are the first to leave Africa, but they don't know that. They only know the land is dying and they must move. They walk along the coast, following the shoreline south. Each day the sun beats down and the land grows drier. They find no water, no game. Some fall behind and never get up. The group shrinks, but they keep moving. After weeks of walking, they reach a narrow strait. The water is shallow here, and on the other side lies green land. They wade in, holding their few belongings above their heads. The crossing is dangerous, but they step onto the new shore. The ground is soft and green. There is fresh water and game. They have crossed into a new continent, the first humans to set foot outside Africa. They don't know it, but they have just changed the course of history. They have to move. For 200,000 years, Homo sapiens stayed put in Africa. The continent was a cradle, stable climate, abundant game, familiar plants. There was no reason to leave. Then, around 100,000 years ago, the climate began to shift. Droughts dried up lakes and rivers. Forests shrank into grasslands. Food became scarce. Groups of hunter-gatherers faced a choice: adapt or move. Some chose to move. The first migrants walked out of Africa through the Sinai Peninsula or across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Arabia. These were not planned expeditions. They were slow, generational movements, families following herds, searching for water, moving a few miles each season. Over thousands of years, they spread across. By 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had reached Southeast Asia. They built rafts and boats to cross open water, island hopping from the Sunda Shelf to Australia. This was a leap. No land bridge existed. They must have had language, planning, and cooperation. The first Australians arrived at least 65,000 years ago, making them the earliest seafarers. Others moved north into the cold. They followed mammoths and reindeer across the vast grasslands of Siberia. Around 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, sea levels dropped. A land bridge called Beringia connected Asia to North America. They crossed it, unaware they were entering, and the African monsoon weakened. Lakes shrank. Deserts expanded. The Sahara, once a green savanna dotted with lakes, became a barrier of sand. Populations fragmented. Groups were forced toward the coasts and the northern edge of the continent. The Sahara, once a green savanna dotted with lakes, became a barrier of sand. Populations fragmented. Groups were forced toward the coasts and the northern edge of the continent. This was not a planned exploration. It was a survival-driven dispersal. The first evidence of humans outside Africa comes from unexpected places. In Greece, the Epidoma skull dates to 210,000 years ago, far older. In Israel, the Mislia cave jawbone pushes the timeline back to 177,000 years ago. These early pioneers may have followed game animals or fled climate shifts. They left Africa in small, sporadic waves, not a single exodus. The Arabian Peninsula served as a gateway. During wet periods, rivers and lakes turned the desert into a savanna. Early humans crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Yemen, following herds of gazelle and ostrich. These early migrants left behind stone tools, but no DNA. They were dead ends, populations that vanished or were replaced by later waves. Yet their footprints prove one thing: the urge to move is as old as humanity itself. Israel, a jawbone from Mislia Cave, is 177,000 years old. Stone tools at Mandarin Cave in France are 125,000 years old. But these were likely failed dispersals. The groups that made them probably died out or returned. The successful dispersal out of Africa began around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago. Genetic studies show that all non-African people today descend from a single small group that crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Arabia. Once in Arabia, these early humans followed the coastlines eastward, reaching Southeast Asia and Australia by 65,000 years ago. The journey was slow but deliberate, moving a few miles per generation. By 45,000 years ago, modern humans had reached Europe, encountering Neanderthals who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. The two groups met, traded, and sometimes interbred. Migration began later, around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago. Genetic evidence points to a small founding population, perhaps only a few thousand individuals. They carried a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup called L3, which is the ancestor of all non-African lineages. These early migrants likely crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, where the water was shallow enough to cross during an ice age. This narrow passage connected Africa to Arabia, opening a gateway to the rest of the world. Once in Arabia, these pioneers followed the coastlines, living off shellfish and other marine resources. Their journey took them along the southern shores of Asia, eventually reaching Southeast Asia and Australia by around 50,000 years ago. Meanwhile, another group took a northern route out of Africa, crossing into the Levant and then spreading into Europe and Central Asia. These two major dispersal waves, the southern coastal route and the northern inland route, shaped the genetic diversity of all people outside Africa. They didn't march inland, they followed the coast. The southern route took them across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into Arabia, then along the shoreline of India, Southeast Asia, and eventually Australia. Archaeological sites support this. At Jebel Fayer in the United Arab Emirates, stone tools dating back 125,000 years have been found, matching the timeline of this coastal migration. These early humans were not just wandering. They were following the resources they knew: shellfish, fish, and coastal plants. In the United Arab Emirates, stone tools date to 125,000 years ago, suggesting an early pulse of human migration out of Africa. At Fahin Lena in Sri Lanka, human remains date to 37,000 years ago, showing that early modern humans had reached the tropical forests of South Asia. In Australia, the oldest confirmed human sites are around 65,000 years old, indicating that people crossed open sea to reach the continent much earlier than once thought. These three sites together paint a picture of multiple waves of migration, each adapting to different environments along the way. To reach Australia, they had to cross open water, the first seafarers. Adaptation was key. In tropical rainforests, they foraged for tubers and hunted small game. In arid interiors, they developed new tools and water storage. In cold steppes, they crafted warm clothing from animal hides and built shelters from bones and skins. Every environment demanded a unique solution. Their toolkits expanded: grindstones for seeds, spears for hunting, digging sticks for roots. They learned to manage fire, using it for cooking, warmth, and even to They also developed complex social structures. Groups formed bands of extended families, sharing food and knowledge. They created art, ochre paintings on rock walls depicting animals and spirits. They performed ceremonies, buried their dead with care, and passed down stories through generations. This was not mere survival. Over millennia, these first Australians spread across the entire continent. They became the Aboriginal peoples, with over 250 distinct language groups. Their deep knowledge of the land, where to find water, when to harvest plants, how to track animals, was encoded in songlines and oral traditions. They were not just inhabitants, they were custodians. They learned to sew tailored clothing and control fire more efficiently. Each new environment required innovation. The migration also left a mark on our genes. All non-Africans carry a genetic bottleneck, a sign that a small group gave rise to everyone outside Africa. This bottleneck means that every person of non-African descent shares a common ancestry from a relatively small founding population. Our DNA tells the story of a journey that began with a few hundred individuals stepping out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. To everyone else, the Toba supereruption 74,000 years ago may have reduced the human population to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. That bottleneck is visible in our DNA. As humans spread, they encountered other hominins. In Europe, they encountered Neanderthals. In Asia, they met Denisovans. And in Indonesia, the small-bodied hominin Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit, was discovered in 2003 on the island of Flores. These encounters were not always peaceful. DNA evidence shows that modern humans outside Africa carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, and some populations have Denisovan DNA as well. But by around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone. The Denisovans disappeared too. Only one hominin species remained, Homo sapiens. We were alone. In Asia, they met Neanderthals. In Asia and Oceania, they met Denisovans. Interbreeding left lasting traces. Neanderthal DNA makes up 1–2% of Eurasian genomes. Denisovan DNA is found in Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians. These genes provided adaptations to high-altitude life in Tibet, cold tolerance in Siberia, and immune defenses against local pathogens. These ancient encounters shaped our species, making us who we are today. But the journey didn't end there. Around 15,000 years ago, the first humans crossed from Siberia into the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge. They spread rapidly, reaching the tip of South America within a few thousand years. These first Americans adapted to every environment: Arctic ice, North American forests, Amazon rainforests, and Andean peaks. Their descendants built empires like the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, and countless other cultures across new climates and pathogens. The out-of-Africa migration was not a single event. It was a series of pulses separated by thousands of years. Some groups stayed in the Middle East for millennia before moving on. Others pushed further into Asia and eventually reached Australia by sea crossings around 65,000 years ago. Each pulse carried a small band of people, perhaps just a few hundred individuals, who adapted to new environments along the way. These early migrants encountered megafauna: giant kangaroos, wombat-like diprotodons, and massive flightless birds. But human hunting and changing climates soon pushed many of these creatures to extinction. By the time the last ice age peaked around 20,000 years ago, humans had settled every continent except Antarctica. Our species had transformed from a small African population into a global force. Deep into Asia, some even returned to Africa, carrying Eurasian genes back. The final frontiers were the Americas, settled around 15,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. And the Pacific Islands, reached only in the last few thousand years. These migrations shaped the genetic and cultural diversity of modern humanity. The first humans to leave Africa were not explorers. They were following the food. Herds of antelope and elephant moved north across the Sinai Peninsula, and small bands of hunter-gatherers followed. They had no map, no plan, no idea they were making history. They were just They reached the Levant, a green corridor of grasslands and forests. Here the climate was mild and game was plentiful, but the door did not stay open forever. Ice ages came and went, locking up water in glaciers and turning the Middle East into desert. The migrants were trapped or pushed further. One group pushed east into Asia. They followed the coast of India, then Southeast Asia, all the way to Australia. This was not a single journey, but 1,000 generations of slow movement. Each step was just another day of hunting and gathering. But over millennia, it added up to a continent. And then there were those who turned north into the cold. They crossed the vast steppes of Central Asia, following mammoths and woolly rhinos. They learned to sew fur clothes, build shelters from bones, and make fire in the snow. These were the people who would eventually cross into the Americas.